all, how important an ally is Austria for those countries that are dead opposed to immigration and to the EU's proposed migration quotas?
Austria is not particularly powerful in absolute terms. It's quite a small country, but it has a lot of symbolic weight because its leader, Sebastian Kurz, has become something of a hero for immigration restrictionist politicians and forces, and for right-wing conservatives across the continent and even in the United States. So Kurz brings a lot of symbolic power to this alliance that he's starting to form around anti-immigration policies, around border defense policies.
Given the very deep divisions in Europe at the moment, can we expect the EU to come up with any real solutions when it has that summit later this month?
I'd be rather skeptical. I mean, for the moment, Angela Merkel, although there has been some movement toward tightening border security and taking a more restrictive, there's always been something of a movement toward more restrictive policies at the border, as Kurz was mentioning. There's still major differences regarding immigration policy between the more right-wing governments in Eastern Europe, Italy and Austria, and more left-leaning governments, especially, for example, the new Spanish government that has just took in the ship that Italy rejected. I think they might have some agreement around trying to beef up the defense of the border and trying to process immigrants or refugees outside of the European Union. They might get some agreement on that. I think around questions like migrant quotas, and other sensitive issues, they're unlikely to come to any sort of agreement.
What about the Dublin Convention, which comes up again and again? Italy is particularly opposed to this. This, of course, is the law that says a migrant or asylum seeker must stay in the first country in which they are fingerprinted or identified.
Mm-hmm. Again, that the migrant quota system is partly designed, I think, to amend the Dublin regulation and take some of the stress off Italy and Greece, which under the current system end up with such a large number of migrants, which they can't, which they're not terribly well equipped to deal with given relatively poor economic conditions. The problem with dealing with Dublin is that if you were to repeal or amend it, then you'd have to distribute migrants to other parts of Europe, which would necessarily require that some participation by Central and Eastern European states. So this coalition that Kurz is trying to build can hang together on dealing with the external borders of the EU, on, for example, trying to process migrants in Libya or in Turkey rather than letting them come into Europe itself, but on trying to amend Dublin and deal with the movement of migrants who are already within the European Union. There are some really seminal, fundamental clashes that they would have a hard time overcoming.
In both Europe and the United States, anti-immigrant feeling is very much on the rise, and the political discourse is very much focused on security and on border control. Should there be more conversations about what immigrants bring to these countries and these economies rather than the danger they pose? Is that missing from the conversation?
I don't know if it's missing from the conversation so much as there are really two separate conversations going on. I mean, I think that a lot of the people who are very concerned with the question of immigration are often people who aren't particularly integrated into the economy as it is. So saying that immigrants bring economic benefits may be true in an aggregate sense, but in reality, for people who are working class or lower middle class and not very well integrated into the economy, they're not getting anything from the economy in general. So whether or not immigrants contributed to it or not, isn't of much import to them. Taking Britain as an example, there was lots of talk before Brexit about how much benefit immigrants brought to the British economy, but many of the people who voted for Brexit were so isolated from, the successful parts of the British economy that argument didn't resonate. They were almost they were so far outside the economy, it didn't really matter. So, I mean, you have essentially two separate discussions from two very divided, the camp of people who are winning in the current globalized economy and the camp of people who are losing.
Ben Margulies, thank you very much indeed.